Okay, so this is what you're writing in on your unit title page. I don't remember what page that was on, page 3. Okay, and then on page 8, the next thing we're gonna put in is that how do I factor flow chart. I turned mine this way and like trimmed the edges. You don't have to do it. If you don't want to trim it, you can just put it in the other way. So what this is a flow chart that I made years ago when I first did this notebook because I wanted my students to have like a sounding board. So like if they have a homework assignment and it just says factor and you have no idea where to start on that problem, this is where you go to start, okay? And it works just like any other flowchart you've ever seen in your life, where you start at the top, okay? So the first thing you're gonna look for is a GCF. And then from there, you're gonna go to how many terms it has. And then all of these boxes down here at the bottom, that's what we're gonna learn throughout this whole unit. So I'm gonna teach you all these different methods to factor a problem. And then you get to decide which one is the best one for each problem that you are faced with, okay? So I probably won't refer back to this every time. I'll try to, but I probably won't remember. But this is a really good place for you if you get stuck. It's like your step-by-step instructions that you've gotten before in your math classes. This is your sounding board of where to go if you're stuck, okay? So that's on page 8. Now page 9, it's gonna look like this. I'm gonna give you a second to write all that down. Okay, so every problem that I've given you so far, you've taken an unsimplified version of a problem and you have simplified it out as far as possible. Okay, that's what we did on page 6 and 7 in your notebook. That's what we did with our integer operations. It was an unsimplified problem that you made as simple as possible. Factoring is when you take a simplified problem and put it back in that unsimplified form. And the reason we do that is because there's a lot of mathematical things you can do after it's in that factored form, okay? So all the things you've been doing so far, factoring is how you undo that. It's how you go the other direction, all right? So to factor simply means to, quote unquote, undistribute. And I don't know if that's actually a word, which is why I'm putting it in quotation marks. So the first thing you're always going to look for when you're factoring or unsimplifying a problem is the GCF. Does anybody know what GCF stands for? Yes. So write yourself a little reminder, always look for a GCF first. Okay, so the first thing we're going to start with is a factored version because it's one that you've seen before. So 2x squared times x minus 4 looks like most of the problems that you saw in your homework and in our notes that we've done so far, right? So if I gave you that problem and I told you to simplify, what would you do? Distribute. So you would multiply 2x squared times x, and what would you get? 2x cubed. And you would multiply 2x squared times negative 4, which would be what? Negative 8x squared. So notice my factored version has parentheses. My distributed version does not. So if I'm going the other direction and I give you a problem like 15x squared minus 5x plus 30, and I ask you to factor that, first thing you're going to look for is a GCF. Okay, 5 goes into all of those terms. That's the biggest thing that goes into all of those terms. So I'm going to factor out a 5 and put it in front of the parentheses. What am I going to have left on the inside? 3x squared minus x plus 6. Okay, what if I give you 2x squared minus 4x? Try that one on your own. When you factored it, did you get 2x times x minus 2? Okay, I'm going to give you one more of each type. Give you a second to work those. Hopefully they're going pretty quick for you. Okay, does anybody want to volunteer and tell me what you got on the first one? What'd you get, Cade? Oh, this one? 5x times x plus 3. Yep. Does anybody want to give me the other one? 15x minus 10. Yes. Okay, so what do you notice about all of these right here in this column? What do they all have? Parentheses. So just in case you haven't caught on to that, that's pretty important. Always has parentheses. So if I ask you to factor something and you circle something with no parentheses, it's probably not factored. Okay, page 10 is going to be that next sheet from your sleeve. It has questions 1 through 8 on it. So now we're going to elevate this a little bit. We had some pretty simple examples, there we go, on the page before. So now we're going to have a little bit more complicated ones. Okay, so when they're more complicated like this, when they have coefficients and more than one variable, I always take it one piece at a time. So I'm going to start first by looking at each coefficient or the numbers in each problem. So what's my greatest common factor between 24, -9, and -12? 3. No. Okay, 3x cubed. Why'd you say 3x cubed? Exactly. The most that each term has is 3 x's, so we can do x cubed. Even though that one has 4, the other two only have 3, so you can only take out 3. What about the y's? Just 1. Okay. Now what goes left in here is what you get when you divide each one of these by that GCF. So 24 divided by 3 is 8. X to the 4th divided by x cubed is x. What happens with the y's? They cancel out, so you don't have to write it. Then on your next term, -9 divided by 3, -3. The x's cancel out. What about y cubed divided by y? Y squared. And then -12 divided by 3, -4. The x's cancel out again. And then you're left with just one y. Okay, as a little self-check, it's a good idea to look inside this box and make sure there's not another GCF within here. If there is, that means this really wasn't the greatest common factor. It was just one of the common factors. Okay, so if you look in here and they're all divisible by something, you have to go back and fix it, because then it's not the greatest common factor. Let's do one more together and then I'll let you do the rest on your own. So what's my GCF between 24, 18, and 2? Okay, can I take out an x? Nope, because my last term doesn't have one, but I can take out a y, like someone said. So 24x squared y divided by my GCF, 24 divided by 2 is 12. I didn't take out any x's, so that didn't change. And the y is going to stay. Or the y's can cancel out, sorry. 18 divided by 2 is 9. The x is going to stay. Y squared divided by y is just y. And what happens on this last term? Minus 1. Even though the 2y and the 2y cancel out, you still have to put that 1 there as a placeholder. Because if I gave you this and told you to distribute, you want to make sure you end up back here. So as a self-check, there's not a GCF within this set of parentheses. So I have gotten my greatest common factor. Okay. I'm going to give you like 5 minutes to work those next 6 questions. Okay, here are the answers, so you can check yours. Yes. That's fine. Okay, while you're checking them, when I was walking around, a lot of you are using the calculators on your phone, which personally, I do not care. Like, I'm not a phone Nazi or anything like that. But when we do the test, you will not have a calculator. You will get that multiplication chart that we put on one of the pages in your notebook, but you will not get a calculator and you will not have your phones. So just be prepared for that.
Number 4,
yes.
-3 work as well?
Yes. It would change all of the signs on the inside. That's totally fine. When you get done checking those, we're going to move on. We're going to do one more page of notes on page 11 in your notebook, and it's going to be the factor by grouping half page in your sleeve. Okay, when we factor, what's the first thing we always look for? Okay, I'm writing this down on every page probably because it's the number one thing people miss on the factoring test. Like we talk about it and we talk about it and we talk about it and people still forget about it. So I like to write as many reminders as I can. Okay, factor by grouping. What do you notice about all 4 of these examples down here at the bottom? How many terms do they have? They have 4 terms. So grouping is what you're going to use when there are 4 terms. So your first step is to split into 2 binomials. Then you're going to factor out the GCF for each binomial. What does binomial mean? 2 terms. Okay, then we have to write really small, and I apologize. We're going to write the common binomial as the first factor and use what's left as your second factor. And the last thing you're going to do is check your answer. So if you remember way back in Algebra 1, when you first started solving equations, your teacher probably told you to plug it back in to check your answer. Okay, factoring is the same way. You can check your answer by simplifying it out to make sure that it looks like that original problem did. Okay, we have 4 minutes, so we're probably not going to get through all of these, but I'm going to try to get through at least 2. So the first thing I'm going to do for example 1 is split it into 2 parts. So the first half and the second half. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is look for a GCF. Spoiler, there's not one. There's no GCF out of all 4 terms. But then I'm going to look at these first 2 terms. What's my GCF out of the first 2 terms? 4x squared, right? If I'm ignoring those last 2, the GCF would be 4x squared. So when I factor that out, I have 4x squared times 2x plus 1. What's my greatest common factor in the second set of parentheses? 5. So that's a positive 5. When I divide that out, you get 2x plus 1. What do you notice? Yep, those sets of parentheses are the same. So now those are your common factor. So you're going to take that common binomial and write it first. And then what's left are the coefficients or the GCFs that you had. So 4x squared plus 5 is what goes in your second set of parentheses. If this were the test, I would take the time and multiply it back out and check it, but since we have less than 2 minutes, I'm going to quickly do the next one. Do I have a greatest common factor between all 4 of my terms? Even though they're giant numbers, they do not have a GCF. I'm going to group them, the first 2 terms and the second 2 terms. What's my GCF here? Oh, 11x squared. When you divide that out, you should get 10x plus 7.
Teachers, please pardon the interruption. I need to see the following students in the office: Charlie Robinson, Ilana Gomez, Mabel Riley, Elijah Nico, Madison Knoll, Colton Graham, Oda England, Elena Jones, Addison Pitcher, Romero Nino, Madison DeFoe, Eliana Almond Cruz, Spike Damaris, please come to the office.
Okay, I'm gonna give you a worksheet for your homework, and you're only gonna do 1 through 15. Do you have to do the whole thing? No, 1 through 15. Would you rather me run around and try to pass it out, or hand it to you as you walk out? Okay, as we walk out. 1 through 15.